crowd, and I recognize a lot of faces, and we're so happy to be here tonight. So I'll go ahead and get us started. My name is Angie Harris. I'm the Director of Alumni Affairs here at Maryville College, and I would just like to welcome everyone for joining us tonight for this special session with a special alumni, Halle Hill. And Halle is with the class of 2017. And you'll learn a little bit more about Halle when I hand it over to Christina. I wanted to mention that tonight's session is sponsored by the Maryville College Alumni Association.
Ashley West is watching us.
By the Maryville College Alumni Association and Impressions Magazine. And I see two staff members on right now of Impressions Magazine. Nance, who is also an assistant in the alumni office, editor-in-chief, Chloe Hamlet up there in the corner. So thank you so much for helping us put this together tonight. I'd also like to introduce next Christina Seymour, who is the co-host of tonight's event. Christina is a lecturer in writing and communications, and she came to Maryville College in 2014 to teach poetry and professional writing. And Christina is Halle's former teacher and the faculty advisor of Impressions Magazine. I'd like to note that after Halle's reading tonight, there will be a question and answer session. And Christine and I will be taking questions either by raising your hand here on the screen, just like this, or you can drop questions into the chat room. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christina.
Hello. It's really great to introduce Halle Hill, who graduated with the class of 2017. She currently serves as a member of the MC Alumni Association Diversity Task Force and is Marketing and Communication Specialist at the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. I first met Halle in my first year at Maryville College, my first teaching year, in the class of Modern and Western Literary Tradition. I remember especially how Halle spoke like a poet in everything that she said. She sat near the front of the room with Ludine Lewis and several other STAR students, and they were always eager to celebrate the literature with me, whether we were chanting, singing, drawing, or talking. Halle visited my women's and minority literature class earlier today, and one of my favorite things that she said is that she writes from a place of questioning, from not knowing how to talk about something. Then also that bitch baby in particular that she hoped would haunt readers, and it does. Halle went on from Maryville College to attain an MFA in writing from Savannah College of Art and Design. She's published short stories with Oxford American, Hobart, and Joyland. Please join me in welcoming Halle Hill.
Well, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. I see some people I didn't expect, and that means the world. I was about to say something about how nice it is to see you all in Tennessee, but I forgot I don't live there anymore. But it's so nice to see everybody. So I want to thank the Alumni Association for having me, Impressions, and Christina for inviting me. And I'm so appreciative. Can you all hear me okay? I'm using my earphones, and sometimes I never know because I don't have a cord. So I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to read two stories. I'm going to read first one of my more recent publications called Seeking Arrangements. And that story is about a young Black woman who finds herself on a dating app for maybe younger people looking to date older people that have money, and how that kind of puts her in a situation that she doesn't expect to be in. And then after that, I'll read just a sample of my story, Bitch Baby, which was published in the Oxford American this past fall. And then I'd love to answer any questions if you have them for me. So I'll get started with Seeking Arrangements. We are taking the Greyhound down there, and Ron brought us the whole row, 3 people deep so we can spread out. I choose the window seat. My toenails are painted into Ching cherry red, and my feet are spread across his lap. Now this is luxury. He pats the top of my brown feet, and his hands are shaking like someone with Parkinson's, but he's fine, sort of. No Parkinson's, he's just hopped up on prednisone. When we board the bus, I am nervous to hand my ticket to the driver. I worry that she knows, that she judges me for letting this white man pay my bills, but she doesn't notice us. Her badge reads, "Hello, my name is Lakeisha," and she stamps our tickets with her eyes forward and her earbuds in, popping a wad of gum. In our seats, we go over the Boca action plan. If this, then this. And soon after, Ron falls asleep. I feel a knot drop in my stomach. We were up talking every night on the phone before he brought me to see his mother in Florida. She lives in a Presbyterian retirement community with gates that keep people like me out. Me and Ron met on a dating site for wealthy men and 20-something women. Me, a college dropout, broke, living in my sister Sheena's house, sleeping on an air mattress, working remotely at a call center, and him, set with funds, too friendly, attentive, online doing nothing but talking to needy women like me. He hangs up the phone by saying, "Good night, babe." He calls me his mutt and little hot thing. He says he's only teasing. He likes to chat on Yahoo email. He thinks I'd look good with a shaved head. Ron tells me I have a lot of potential, but I talk too much. I'll be 28 this fall, so my window is closing for a real career. The best way for me to get it going is to listen to him more. Ron's expertise spans over 20 years in the media industry, he likes to tell me. He made his millions after he sold his startup in the early 2000s. He says he's seen all the gorgeous women during his time, and I could be one of them if I really wanted to be. So with his help, I'm trying. Ron is sick. He's barely able to walk long distances. His face is swollen and his neck is too. When we met in person 2 weeks ago at the Cheesecake Factory, he looked nothing like he did online. He coughs up phlegm sometimes into a seersucker handkerchief. On the bus, I keep his medicine bag with me at all times. I know what to do if he has a flare-up. I have his EpiPen, his steroids, his inhaler. I keep the Benadryl, aspirin, and Zoloft. I have Band-Aids and Tums and tiny bottles of Pedialyte. I have turmeric capsules and Dayquil and puffy white pills of Ambien. Whatever he needs, I have. I got him. But I don't know why he requires all this, and I don't know why I'm here, and I don't know exactly what's ailing him. The window feels nice and cool against my back. The ride from Nashville to Florida is 20 hours in total, and we are almost halfway there. We have a stop in Macon soon, which I need because my foot is asleep and I have to pee. A man with big eyes sits behind us and talks to himself loudly. He smells, but I don't want him to be embarrassed that he stinks, so I turn my face towards the glass. Outside the window, the sweet cornfields are high. They go on, touching the indigo sky, and I want to stretch my leg out further, but Ron is now in a deep sleep with his mouth open and his palm looped under my shin. His breathing is shallow. Rise, fall, rise, fall, rise, fall. His breath catches and holds longer than normal, and I sit up alert, just in case. I put a finger over his nose to check, but eventually he gulps the air. Ron turns 51 tomorrow, but he looks 15 years older than that. While his mouth hangs, I look at his face. I mean, really look at it. His pores are large, and he has red moles around the bulb of his nose. I pull up the photo album on my phone with all the pretend party ideas I have for him. A Pinterest board filled with balloons and party hats and streamers. I wish I could buy him a big cake covered in pink fondant. "Happy birthday, Ron," it will say in saccharine swirly font, just for him to smile. I want to make a moment with him and watch him eat big spoonfuls. In my imagination, I'm planning something grand for him in Boca, but I don't have the money. Scroll on my phone and have 6 notifications, all of them from Sheena. Where are you? Where are you? Hello? Are you okay? I'm sick of this shit, Crystal. No, really, just let me know you're okay, please. She's angry, but I have to take this time for me. She knows I always come back after these things, and I need to have boundaries. That's another thing he's helping me with, boundaries. I'm getting better at naming my needs. Ron says I'm getting better at standing up for myself. I'll be late on the rent this month again, but Sheena will understand. Ron says he'll pay me on the way back from Boca. And besides, Sheena's got me like that. I've only been gone a few days. We cross over into Warner Robins city limits, and the man with the big eyes behind me starts acting crazy. He gets louder and louder, and it starts to smell worse. He's pissed himself. The man with the big eyes runs up to the front of the bus and starts yelling at Lakeisha. Let me off now, he shouts, completely berserk. When he grabs the back of the driver's neck, I panic. The whole cabin is frozen, and a few passengers gasp. I hear the Mexican lady in the row next to me pray softly, and I watch her pull her 2 babies closer. Lakeisha jerks the bus over to the side of the road and opens the doors. It's pitch black, and we're in the middle of a cornfield. The doors swing open into the hot June air, and the man with the big eyes bolts down the steps and runs with all his might into the corn. He runs and runs and runs until we don't see him anymore, until he's just a blip. After 10 minutes or so, Lakeisha drives on and Ron wakes up. His drool is dry on my cheek. Miss anything, Angel? I shake my head and look back out the window. The sky is so black, my temples ache from the squinting. I keep looking for the man with big eyes, but he doesn't show up. The layover in Macon is around 2 hours, so we get off the bus in the Walmart parking lot and walk across the street to the Applebee's. I'm watching my figure at the moment, so Ron suggests we eat here so we can both have something. He's one of those men who will order for me and says things like a steak for me and perhaps a salad for the lady. The seats in the restaurant booth are cracked. Ron orders a Michelob Ultra and nurses it, and I have a few Long Island iced teas top shelf because he's good to me that way. He says it's okay for me to loosen up every once in a while, and I can trust him to look after me. I have about 4 more drinks and a Cobb salad with warm bacon bits. Ron briefs me on what to do when we get to Boca. With his mother's dementia worsening, she doesn't remember much, and he wants her to think he's settled down with someone good. If she asks who I am, I say his fiance. If she asks how we met, I say at work. If she asks when the wedding is, I say next summer. Ron reaches across the table to hold my hand. He takes it in his palm and rubs my knuckles, smiling warmly. I smile back and feel like I'm choking. When we get up to leave, my head starts to slosh, and I reach for my bag to make sure I got him. Ron flips through his phone while I claw. I have it. I have the naproxen, the Allegra, the Centrum one-a-day men's health vitamins. I need him to walk me back to the bus, but I still know I have everything he could need if he asks for it. I feel like I'm going to throw up, but I hold it down. It's so late, and we have 10 hours till Boca. Lights from the Cheetah Strip Club blink in the distance, and Ron pulls me by my arm and walks me up the stairs onto the bus. The Macon newspaper has a Miss Heather's horoscope column where you can read about your zodiac sign. I pull out my copy and read Ron his. When I have this many drinks, I talk to him way too close to his face. I drop the Ambien into his palm and read aloud about Geminis. It says something about the moon being in perfect transit for love and creativity, and how he is on the cusp of a rebirth. I take the horoscope as a sign that I'm in the right place at the right time. I'm yapping about his astrological traits, great with communication, difficulty in expressing emotion. When Ron puts his hot mouth on mine, I hate it, but I don't push it off. It's wet as he pulls me closer with the stronger of his arms. This time they aren't shaking. The Ambien makes him handsy, but I've been drinking too, so it's nobody's fault. We sloppy kiss until he starts slurring his words. As he drifts, his mouth slides off mine and he slumps in the seat. I look at his hand and notice a gash, probably where he scratched himself. I look through my bag and find a Band-Aid and some Neosporin. I dab the wound with a cotton swab. It has a gloss from the salve that shines. But I fix him up just fine. I look after him. The cabin light's cut out and it's so dark, I can't find his face anymore. When I look up to the front of the bus, at the back of Lakeisha's neck, she rubs the spot in a circle where the man with the big eyes grabbed her. For a moment, I think, this is it. Right now, I can decide it's over and I'll bring Lakeisha too. She and I could make a run for it. She'll park this piece of shit and we'll bolt, arm in arm. We'll be okay. We could do it. We could find our way. I could pull the stop line. I know I could get off right here if I wanted to. Thank you. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of go back a little bit in time, and I'm gonna read a section of my story that I wrote called Bitch Baby that was published in the Oxford American, as I said earlier. And so I think that I really was inspired by this piece when I was living in Savannah by the coast. I was kind of struggling with the trauma that I was experiencing as every other Black person was, as we faced so much police brutality. That's always been something that's going on in our communities. We just have more people who are kind of dedicated to showing it. And so I had just so much guilt and, you know, I was anticipating so much pain. When will it show up in my community? When will it show up in my family? Or, you know, when will it happen to me? So I kind of do what I do and I internalize that pain and try to figure it out with my creativity. I was thinking of a lot of communities, even within the Black community, that don't get a witness. I'm thinking of the trans community, Black femmes, non-binary people. So this is kind of a story that I created as I was grieving and trying to honor them and my family members who kind of came before me. We had big plans that night. While we cleaned the floorboards with old rags and lye, we kept watching the clock in the living room for 8 p.m. It was hot and sticky, late July when we left Claudine's. I told Reggie to drop me off so I could get ready and get the reefer I kept under my bed. I usually met up with Victor when we went to Savannah. He was a nice enough guy who was in the service and always offered to buy me drinks. We liked to smoke in his car and dance while Reggie went off with the doctor at the hotel for the evening. I rushed into the house to get my things, hoping to slip past Mama, who I knew was up. Her room was at the very back of the hallway, and she was a night person, perpetually restless, walking back and forth, pacing around her twin-sized bed over nothing and everything all the time. I lingered in the hallway for a moment to see if she would say anything. I thought I heard her speak up, but she didn't. I went to my room and pulled on my nice black dress and reached under my bed in the little box where I kept all the things I shouldn't have. I put my hair up high on my head and sprayed a little bit of Shalimar perfume and rushed out the door. I tried to slip out and say nothing until I heard her clear her throat. I stopped. I'll be back later, Mama. I left something at Claudine. She waited a while until she said, okay, love, with a drop of sadness in her voice. I paused again. I'll make sure Reggie gets home fine, okay? She let out a sigh. Thank you, Celine. I'm so glad he has you looking after him. Earlier at Claudine's, Reggie pulled me aside and showed me a new dress he had stuffed down in his cleaning bag. He got the dress from the consignment store. It was silver and beaded and shimmered at the bottom. He smiled as he laid it across his torso and bounced around. I hadn't seen him like this in a while. It was nice to see him giddy. He told me he would pick me up at the street light around 9 that evening, and we would be off to Pinky's. Reggie and the doctor were going places. The doctor pumped his head of European dreams. He told Reggie about France and how people like them could live freely. Reggie swore one day they'd move. The doctor would leave his wife and baby, and Reggie would leave me, and they would start over together. That night, when Reggie came to get me, he was feeling bold. Under his jacket, he was already wearing that dress. It glittered all over him. His hair was fresh with a perm and slicked to the side, and he was grinning, the tips of his baby teeth showing. Reggie put the windows down, and I hopped in and started rolling. I lit the papers and made the car glow red. I passed him the blunt. It was going fine until we swerved a little. The cop had started following us some time back, and it made Reggie nervous. He drove slowly, deliberately. Fucking pigs, he sighed. Reggie chewed on his knuckle and tapped his foot. He reached to turn the dial on the radio, and the car dipped to the left. Then the lights came on. It all happened so quickly. The stop, the pull, the baton, the crack, the blood, the gurgle. My brother's body laid on the road, gashes all over, and I watched the cop stomp the crown of his scalp, then the back of his head. Reggie screamed and stopped altogether, and I ran to Reggie. I howled, holding him and rocking him. The officer spit in front of me. Leave it and drive on, he said, unless you want to turn too. I tried to pat Reggie's face to get him to wake up, but I couldn't make him stay conscious. The blood was running all down his face and in his mouth. He started throwing up blood and bile and teeth. He muttered over and over again, I can't see, Seeley. Why can't I see? When the cop car was far enough away, I pulled him into the passenger side of our sedan and wiped the blood from around his mouth and eyes. I screamed. His eyes were going in every direction. I drove to the hospital with blood on my good clothes. When they got him on the gurney and he passed out, I found a nurse and asked her for a phone to call who we needed most. Mama rushed there. When she saw him unconscious and bloodied, shining in his new silver dress, she didn't cry. She just reached out to hold his hand and shook her head. A few weeks after the accident, Reggie turned 23, and Miss Claudine and Mabel came to visit at the hospital. They brought Reggie chicken salad and flowers, a balloon, and a few magazines. After some time, he was finally able to sit upright and eat and talk. Most of his front teeth were missing, and the doctors gave him special tinted glasses to keep over his eyes. When Claudine and Mabel walked into the room, they took pity on my brother. Mabel set the gift in front of him and patted his hand with her gloved one. Reggie, I am just so sorry to hear about your accident, Claudine cooed while Mabel grimaced, nodding. How are you feeling, dear? Claudine continued. Do you want to see what they did to me? Reggie asked. Before they could answer, he took his glasses off and his eyes flayed to the side. His pupils turned lazy and went opposite one another. The room fell silent while we all stared at Reggie. Eventually, I asked everyone to leave and said my brother needed to rest. When Reggie was on his pain medicine, he kept asking the doctor. He kept asking if the doctor was coming to get him, so I started saying soon. Reggie would ask me every morning, is he coming today? And I would always answer, soon, Reggie, I promise soon. One day, before he was discharged, he called me over to his bed and gripped my arm harder than he ever had. He took his glasses off and turned his face to me, his eyes floating all around. I need you to tell me, Celine, am I still beautiful? Do I look like I can see? I held his face and he gave a soft grin. I could see the pink of his mouth in between his broken teeth. All the little ones were gone now. I brushed some sleep off his face. I looked at Reggie as hard as I could and tried to imagine my brother before it all got beaten out of him. My words got caught in my mouth, but I pushed them through anyway. He searched my face, waiting for the answer. Reggie, you are still the most gorgeous thing. His eyes looped around his sockets. He smiled at me. And if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't even know from looking at you that anything was wrong. Thanks.
Thank you, Hallie. We have some time for some questions. If anyone would want to unmute themselves and ask, or Angie and I can monitor the chat for some questions too.
I can start with an easy one. Hi, Hallie.
Hi.
How do you like Laramie?
That's a good question.
I used to live there too. It's good.
Right. Small world. I mean, well, let me start with what I don't like. Negative 30 degrees at night. I'm not a fan. I'm not sure how I feel about 6 inches of snow every day, but I love being outdoors. I love being so close to Colorado. I love being able to go to New Mexico. I love the space and the quiet, but I'm just adjusting to the cold. So.
When you were writing your book, was there ever like a time where like you thought to yourself like, oh, I wish I had taken like this class, or I wish I had gone a little bit like took a class more serious or anything, or like just anything that you would probably change to prepare yourself better for that?
No, I think maybe I wish that I would have taken my creativity more seriously sooner and spent the time on the craft and not thought it was just a private hobby. But I think that just comes with, kind of discernment, what you need to lean into. But I think every class I took and everything that I've studied influences what I write about. So I don't really regret much of anything.
I have a question. Are you glad that you got a writing MFA?
That's a great question. I am glad that I got a writing MFA, and I'm frustrated by it. I think I felt like I wanted, if I'm going to be a writer and try to make this a profession, I wanted the credential that's going to solidify that and give me credibility. And I also think I felt, being from a marginalized community, I needed a little something extra. And so sometimes I resent that, because maybe other populations with more privilege kind of just come built in with this confidence that anything they do is golden and is correct, right? But having the time to write, having the time to create, being around other people, being in an art school culture, I think it was positive, and I would do it again. And I do think in some ways it's necessary, but I also have learned that many writers don't need it. But for me, having the structure and the time and assignments and deadlines is really good for my personality. So I say yes.
Thank you.
Hallie, there's a question in the chat room for you. It's from Matthew Graham. Being a senior who is considering pursuing an MFA after graduation, what would you recommend about selecting a university after leaving Maryville? What led you to SCAD over other options you may have had?
That's a really great question. And I think I was really drawn to location, faculty, and close proximity to my family. So I was trying to find a place that I felt at the time, I thought I was going to write nonfiction, which is funny because that's changed. So I was looking primarily for nonfiction programs. I was looking for faculty that I was familiar with. And so that kind of, and I'm really driven by my surroundings and aesthetics. So I wanted to go somewhere that was going to inspire me, and somewhere where I could get, if not full funding, partial funding. And so I think I looked at like SCAD, I looked at Warren Wilson's MFA, and then there's an MFA at a school called Bard College up in New York. So I think it's the most important thing I would say is, and what I wish I had taken more time in, is go somewhere where you feel like you're going to be supported and where the faculty really inspire you. So if you're reading poetry or if you're reading fiction and this, novelist is just like changing your world, look to see where they went to school. And if it feels like too far of a fetch, maybe look where people they're inspired by went to school or their peers went to school. And then, I guess have faith. I was warned that MFA programs are competitive and hard to get into. And while I think that's true, I also think everything is scary until you try. So apply, have a few backups, but go in where you feel you're called, because that usually will work out.
Yeah, there's another question also in the chat. What words of grace do you have for creatives who are navigating pandemic fatigue, and what has worked for you?
My words of grace are, do what you can. You don't have to write a novel while you're in a pandemic. And then also, everything is inspiration. So I really love reality television. And I used to be afraid of sharing that because I thought it wasn't like chic and elegant, until I really thought like, actually, and maybe this is just me allowing myself to do it, but everything that we're consuming is inspiration. Nothing is too off to not be sacred or inspire you. So, that rest, that fatigue, the isolation that winter brings is really, something that can spark that creativity. So, take the pressure off. And another thing I thought, as I've been a creative who not only lives somewhere cold and quiet and isolated, but with a pandemic, is, be selective with your time and put your creativity first. If you have a job, this and that, carve time to kind of be with yourself in those private moments and make space for what gives you life first, because that's not only going to give you the energy to do the practical things you need to do to live, but that's how you take care of yourself. So before I talk to anybody, I am getting up and saying, I choose my creativity and I show up for myself every day. Even if it's just a few minutes, it just makes my day a lot better.
Question. I was wondering what kind of response you got to your story, Bitch Baby, and whether or not, whatever response you got, did it surprise you? Was it pretty par for the course? I just wanted to hear more about, the afterwards.
I got a really great response, and I think that a lot of people saw the story, the title, as a reclamation. I know that I think a lot of people said that it kind of struck them and gave them this kind of perspective. And I think that's the great thing about fiction, is it kind of gives this reader the intimacy that they need to kind of engage, but the distance that sometimes nonfiction doesn't offer, because sometimes nonfiction can feel combative because it's you and another person, but fiction gives this myth of a veil. So it was pretty well received. My mom was just confused with why I used a swear word in my title. So we had to talk through that and tell her it wasn't just for shock value. There's some historical significance, but it was well received. And I never thought that I would get published in the Oxford American. And I remembered I was leaving work. I was working in Asheville at the time, and I was working late, and I fell out in the hallway because I was so thrilled. And my coworker was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "This is not a medical emergency. I'm just excited." So I think it was pretty well received. Thank you.
Okay, Bill Meyer wants to know what brought you to Wyoming and how long have you been there?
Hey, Dr. Meyer. Oh, it's so good to hear from you. I was hoping you would come. I moved to Wyoming because I got a really great opportunity to work at the university. And I knew I kind of wanted to live out west. I wanted that experience, but I needed kind of a more practical pull. I didn't just want to sell all my possessions and kind of get in a van and go to Wyoming. So when I was able to get a job and be kind of like staff writing and working with students, I knew that I would take it. So I moved out here in July. So I've been here since the summer.
Hallie, there's another question from Robin Robb. I'm an MC alumni working as a school librarian, and I'm always searching for Black authors for my elementary students. They need literature about characters like themselves. Ever consider writing for children?
No, I don't think I've ever considered writing for children. And I think I kind of always thought maybe I would do that after, if it's in my path, if I become a mother, because I think I just don't have the insight to kind of go there. And I feel like childhood is really sacred, and I just haven't felt that pull yet to write for children. I really respect people who write for children. I'm trying to think of that author, Jason Reynolds, maybe. He's incredible. He writes a lot of great books for children. And so I don't personally feel called to that in my life right now, but maybe. I wouldn't say never, but just not right now.
I have a question. Hey Holly. Thanks
Hey,
for
Antonio.
this. I have a question. I know you mentioned about you going to school for writing and maybe sometimes maybe having second thoughts. Any advice for someone who haven't went to school for writing and maybe have a little background in writing and wanted to kind of connect with some resources, maybe free online or and kind of get those steps cracking to kind of start writing, or as a beginner writer? What's your take on, or I guess you can say, what are some resources that someone could connect to that for someone that's interested in writing?
Okay. Good question. Thank you. I don't know. I don't know if I feel like I have much to offer about that, because I feel like I'm right there with people who are just starting to write, like I'm new at this too. But I can maybe share what's worked for me. I think before writing anything, having a really great journaling practice, getting in touch with what you're thinking on a daily basis really helps with writing. Reading a lot of things that are moving to you, finding a genre or an author that you resonate with and absorbing that can maybe help shape voice. And then there's tons of writing workshops that you can go to. Like, I think Catapult is a company online that offers them. And I know my friend Bud Smith is a writer, and he does workshops, and I've actually done them the past 2 seasons, just to have a little bit of structure. So I say workshops, maybe find one buddy that you really trust, who is like for you and will use criticism as a sharpening tool, but not to kind of have a power thing over you, and just privately write with them for a little bit and then kind of go from there. I think developing that practice will be really helpful. And if you feel called to it, do it. That's what I'd say.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Hallie.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi. Interested to know, above all things, what do you think was the main assignment that the main assignment at Maryville College that advanced your writing capability and led you into becoming a serious writer?
That's a really good question, Sarah. You know, I cannot think of an assignment at the moment. I do know that I was studying, I believe it was Kierkegaard with Dr. Meyer, and we were talking about the need of living from the inside out. And that should be the basis of how you show up authentically in the world, and allowing kind of your inner working to navigate how you work with others. And I think that that has stayed with me all through these years. And I think it inspired me to think about where I could turn inward and how I could express that in a way that felt authentic, yet kind of gave me autonomy. And then, of course, I got to write for the Highland Echo. I was an Isaac Anderson scholar, so I was always kind of getting to talk and meet people who had convictions and had stories to tell. So I think those were the kind of the main things that shaped me. And then I think too, as I kind of learned how to take care of my mental health, and I was utilizing the campus counseling center, working with the therapists there and tapping into my creativity is another thing that really shaped me. So all of that process, I think, is what it was, if that answered your question.
Cool. I love you.
I love you too.
Okay, I'm going to read a question from the chat from Clarissa. So Morrison was asked once, do you worry about alienating your audience by writing only about Black people? Halle, what would you say if asked this question, and what would you tell up-and-coming aspiring Black writers who are hesitant to tell Black stories?
So I think that there is no possible way for Black folk to be alienated anymore. We have suffered, we have been silenced, we have been shamed, and we have been, very closeted. And so my response to that question, if I was asked it, is, my part of my duty on earth is to honor my ancestors by telling their stories. I have a calling to think about them, my grandmothers, my great grandmothers, my kin, the people who didn't get to tell their stories, and like they have a chance to live through me. So it's a spiritual thing, and so I think that I do the most service when I tell my stories. And then part two is, I think it's really important to write what you know, to write where you come from. That's how you're authentic. I don't know anything about being from, an Irish family and living in Brooklyn, no concept there. But I know a lot about being a Black woman from the South, class change, social change, living in Appalachia and living in the Deep South. So those are kind of the things that I think is important. I encourage people to write about that. Black students, Black people contain multitudes. So just as I'm writing a story about Black suffering, I'm thinking about Black joy. I always say how lucky I am to be from the culture I am, because I think we are the kind of birthplace of creativity, longevity, joy. So I just encourage people that are marginalized to write about their stories, because we've been silenced enough. So that's what I'd say.
Halle, I have another question from the chat from Caitlin. How did you come up with your titles? Could you break down what your process was when considering how to title your work?
Sure. So it's really interesting that titles are usually the first thing that comes to me. I usually get a title or a phrase and it just is in my head and I'm thinking about it 24/7, and it just is like sticking in my head on a loop. And so then I'm like, well, this has to be a title. And then I kind of try to fulfill the promise of writing the story to that, what I'm thinking of. Very rarely does the title change. It kind of sticks. So it's usually something that just catches my eye, or something that, you know, that I've heard that is coming back to me and kind of won't leave me alone. So that's usually the process for how I work with titles.
Thank you. Rebecca Lucas asks, how important is the intersectionality of the identities of the characters about whom you write? Is that something you intentionally voice, or is it unintentional?
I think it's very intentional, and intersectionality is so important, especially for marginalized communities to exist. I'm always thinking about intersectionality, and I am a product of it, or at least a product of the fusing of multiple layers of cultures. So I'm always thinking about it. I'm not sure if it's always in the front of my mind, but I know when I'm writing, I'm always trying to come back to my core values of inclusivity, challenging the narrative, and telling the truth. So it's conscious, and then I think it's just so ingrained in my subconscious as well.
Thank you, Halle. I have a question from Brian. He says, you just spoke about ancestry. What does it mean to you to be a good ancestor?
That's a really great question, Brian. For me, to be an ancestor, I think that I have a kind of daily responsibility to think of my ancestors and honor them with my life. And so I'm always feeling like the best way for me to do that is to think about them, share what they want to share. And I think they guide me in my daily life. So I actually have, you know, a pretty great practice of talking with them, communing with them, honoring them. I keep pictures of the matriarchs in my family who I adore and miss dearly. And, you know, I ask them for help. And, you know, I see myself in them. I see my mother in them. I see my characteristics in them, and they give me strength. So being a good ancestor is kind of like giving credit, you know, and an assignment. Like, I may be writing about these stories, but it doesn't come from me, just me. I've had these people kind of telling me about their lives and shaping me. So it just means showing up for them and living in my truth, because when I do that, it honors them too.
Thank you,
Halle.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hey, Halle, it's Aaron.
Hey, Aaron.
But first, thank you for sharing those. And one thing I noticed with your writing, which I really appreciate, is kind of the real and kind of the graphic details you put in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, that's so important to represent what's actually happening, not sugarcoating. But knowing you and your great personality, and like just like how sweet you are and how kind you are, I'm sure kind of the development and how that evolved for you. I mean, it's hard to hear those details. So I imagine writing them was probably difficult. So walk us through that the evolution of that writing for you.
Of course. And I'll start with a story. When I was defending my thesis, I had a faculty member who was more on the academic side of my MFA program, and she didn't have me in any writing classes. And so when she received my thesis and read them, she, at the defense, was like, it's like I was reading a different person. I had no idea that you were like this, because I do present sometimes sort of mild and reserved occasionally. And so I think that when it comes to writing about those graphic details, it in part was in my journey of being willing to accept the truth of my people and allowing kind of my, allowing the kind of desire of my personality to get down to the nitty gritty. You know, I really like to get to the heart of stuff. I just would rather kind of go deep than stay on the surface, and allowing that to come forward in my work and kind of show a side of my personality that I don't often just present right away. So I think that process came from, if I want the reader to trust me and to hear me and to consider my stories, I have to tell it the way that it is and really happens. And I think that so much of change comes from when we pay attention to things, even if they are brutal and uncomfortable. That's how we gain kind of a temperament and ability to sit with difficult things. So that's how I kind of got there. And it was hard to write it. Sometimes, you know, my stomach would hurt and I would feel grief, but I also always felt satisfied because I knew there was nothing else that I could put on the page. I said it all how I felt I could at the time. So that's kind of how that process has happened for me.
Thanks, Sage.
Okay, so it's been about 20 minutes and we will start wrapping up unless there is one more question from the audience. Halle, you are fascinating to listen to, so I would hate to let any of those questions go, but I will look around here. Okay. Well, this has been a real pleasure. I've learned so much, and I really was intrigued by both of your stories, and it's such an honor to have you here tonight reading to alumni and students and staff and faculty. This is one of the great things about the pandemic is that even though you're in Wyoming and we're sitting here in Maryville, Tennessee and other places that you can read to us and that we can learn from you and hear your voice and hear your process behind your writing and why you do what you do. So this has been such an amazing experience for us, and I hope that we can do this again with you and other alumni who are such talented writers. So with that, I will